I'm Joe Arnold, president of the Louisville Forum. Welcome to our May 2022 meeting. We meet the second Wednesday of each month at Vincenzo's Restaurant in downtown Louisville, and all are welcome. Founded in 1984, the Louisville Forum is a nonpartisan public issues group that hosts debates and discussions of contemporary and sometimes controversial public policy issues that affect the greater Louisville community. For more information on the Louisville Forum, our programs, or to make reservations, please visit louisvilleforum.org. Today's program, the candidate forum in Kentucky's 3rd Congressional District Democratic primary. Please note the Louisville Forum does plan a debate this fall between the Republican nominee and the Democratic candidate in this general election. The retirement of 8-term incumbent Representative John Yarmouth provides the first vacancy in this congressional seat since Ron Mazzoli retired in 1994. The last previous vacancy was in 1966. We are speaking with 2 Democratic candidates today. Again, Representative Attica Scott is here with us in person. We will speak with her in the second half of the program. We begin now, though, however, with Senator Morgan McGarvey, who is joining us remotely because he is quarantining after an exposure to COVID-19. Senator, thank you for joining us. We hope that you and your family are well. First off, what makes you the best candidate for the 3rd Congressional District?
Thank you, Joe. Before I get started too much, want to make sure everybody can hear me. And so thank you guys. I really appreciate it. Want to say thank you, first of all, for allowing me to be here virtually. This is not at all how I expected to be spending the Wednesday before the election, quarantining in home. I want to be fully transparent with everybody. The exposure is we had a great derby. My wife, Chris, is not just positive with COVID, she is sick with COVID. And she is here in bed with symptoms. And so that is a close exposure. We talked to our physician. I talked to the head of infectious diseases at Norton Hospital. They said that the incubation period for this version of the virus is typically 2 to 3 days. On an abundance of caution, we are quarantining until I test negative and that incubation period has passed. So I appreciate it. I really want to be there. I have sat in the audience so many times before. I have spoken at the Louisville Forum before. I can't even see you guys in this format, which is unfortunate, but feel like taking a second cookie, do so. I'm not going to be the one being judgmental. So, I want to talk about a little bit about what I've done since going to Frankfurt, why I am running for Congress, and why this race is important. Right? There's an op-ed by Charles Blow in the New York Times several months ago, in which he actually criticized President Biden. And he said, you're doing a great job of building things like the infrastructure package, but where are you on defending things like the voting rights bill, the Omnibus Voting Rights Act, which needs to pass? That resonated with me. When I ran for the state Senate in 2012, I made a promise that I was going to go to Frankfurt and stand up and defend our values, to fight for people, while still building coalitions to get big things done. I got elected Democratic leader of the Senate when a guy named Matt Bevin was governor. I literally had to lead the Democratic fights on everything from whether a woman could have access to an abortion and reproductive care, to whether teachers could keep their pensions, to whether kids could stay insured to the Medicaid program. I've been in the super minority every single day since serving in the state Senate. But while leading those fights, I've still built coalitions and authored and passed 18 bills into law. I've written and influenced several more. And these aren't just little things either. Right? Kentucky doesn't have a new bridge named something because I've been in office. I passed a law protecting victims of human trafficking, making it a paradigm shift that you can actually use human trafficking as an affirmative defense to a charge of prostitution. I passed the first ever bill solely benefiting our historically Black colleges and universities, going in and listening to communities and finding practical solutions. Found out that Simmons College, right here in Louisville, that their students weren't getting access to Kentucky tuition grant money through a quirk in the law. I changed that. Found out that Simmons College, which started as a teaching college, wasn't able to offer a teaching degree despite being a nationally accredited teaching college. So I passed a law that changed that. We know the difference that one Black teacher can make in a student's life, and we're going to have more of them in Jefferson County because of this legislation. I passed a bill in 2016 in Kentucky that preserved marriage equality. I think this shows why it's important to be a policymaker. As you remember, in 2015, the Supreme Court said, love is love, everyone can get married. Well, the Supreme Court said everyone could get married. The legislative branch, policymakers, determine the policy of how. And I don't know if you guys remember that we had a little clerk here in Kentucky named Kim Davis, who after the Supreme Court came out with that decision, decided that she didn't think it was such a good idea. So when we came back into session in 2016, the state senator from Kim Davis's district, he came up with the idea that we should create two separate but equal marriage license forms for people getting married. We've been down the road of separate but equal before, and we know it is disastrously discriminatory. Now, this is the time in government when you want to scream, and sometimes you do. But screaming alone does not get things done. The two most important things I've learned since being in office to say are, I don't know, and what do you think? To listen, that's how you solve problems. So just like knocking on people's doors when you're running for office and asking what they think, I went to my colleagues' doors and knocked on their door and went in private and asked them, how do you support this? What do you think? I got the same answer over and over and over again, right? They kept saying that their constituents want their daughters to be identified as a bride on their marriage certificate. I thought, okay, we can do that. I mean, I don't even know where my marriage certificate is. So I came up with what I thought was a pretty simple solution, right? Let's have one marriage license form where you get to choose how you're identified. Circle one, bride, groom, or spouse, right? Simple ideas don't always take off in Frankfurt, so we kept working at it. And eventually it ended up with me having a meeting with the county clerk from Henderson and 5 or 6 of her friends in my office. I actually had to perform a fake marriage ceremony with a guy named David Hawk. And they said, you know what, that's a great idea. I want to finish this story, Joe, and talk a little bit about why I'm running. We went in front of all 120 county clerks to present the idea. The county clerks had endorsed this idea of 2 marriage license forms. And literally in a scene out of a movie, I walk in front of all 120 county clerks. They say a prayer, they say the Pledge of Allegiance, they sing the national anthem, they give the state 4-H president an award, and they say, and now we'd like to welcome Democratic State Senator from Louisville, Morgan McGarvey, to talk about gay marriage, right? You could have heard a pin drop, but by the end of it, we got it done. We kept Kentucky out of the headlines for all the wrong reasons, and that's why I'm running for Congress. Because I believe we have to listen to each other. I think we still have to listen to each other and hold on to the notion that our government can still do big things to help people. We can be reminded of that right now. Our government recently worked with private industry to speed up the distribution of a vaccine in 9 months. It's allowing this form to happen. And for those who do get the virus, the rate of hospitalization or worse is significantly lower, right? We can still do big things and solve problems, and we have problems to solve. We have to solve the immediate threat that is climate change, and we can do it. We have to end generational poverty. We can do it. We can pass the child tax credit. We can pass universal pre-K and make sure that parents aren't choosing between whether they go to work, whether their child has childcare. We can make sure every Kentuckian, every American has access to high-speed internet. We can address the impact of systemic racism. Right? We can recognize that our country was founded in iron. That 250 years, we said all men are created equal. That wasn't true. Right?
Senator,
we let discrimination be legal.
Senator, we're going to run out of time, unfortunately, if we don't get to some questions for you right away, since we're at 12:09, 12:10 right now. Okay,
Sure.
So let's go right to it. You already referenced this, so if we have more questions than we have minutes left. So what is the piece of legislation that you led or sponsored of which you are most proud? Did you already mention that in your earlier remarks?
I probably didn't. And it's like asking somebody to choose their favorite movie. It's a hard question. But I'll go back to, actually, what made me run for the state senate the first time was when we had twins, and they were born 14 weeks premature, weighing 1.5 pounds and 1 pound and 15 ounces each. And while they were in the hospital for 99 days, and you're watching the medical bills pile up, we had to fight the insurance company to make sure they get the care they needed to survive. And, I know you make a lot of promises and you say a lot of prayers when you're sitting in a hospital room, but I made a promise that if we got out of that and brought our babies home from the hospital, we would try to make sure no other family had to have that same fight. I did not know a state senate seat was going to open up. So shortly after we brought the kids home from the hospital, but it did. I got in, and in my very first session, I passed the first insurance mandate in 21 years, requiring health insurance companies to cover this life-saving care for premature babies. And that's still something that I'm very proud that we were able to get done.
Thank you. So we have two questions I'm going to combine just for the sake of time because they both kind of allude, I think, to your how you basically are earning this place. Uh, the first one, and so you know, I read the questions as they're scripted. Some would say that your endorsements were handed to you by way of privilege and proximity to power. How would you say that you've earned your endorsements? The second question I'm going to combine: if you were a black woman and not a white and or not a white male, do you believe the Kentucky Senate would have allowed you to hold a leadership position or hear any of your proposed bills?
Thanks. Yeah. You know, again, I ran for the state Senate 10 years ago. And when I got in, we had 3 days to decide whether to run. So I had to get in and I had to start knocking on doors, building coalitions, trying to get elected immediately. So when Congressman Yarmouth got out of this race, I got in immediately. It might look like I got a lot of endorsements quickly, but the opposite is true. It's people I've worked with for 10 years in every corner of our community. I've worked with House Leader Joni Jenkins. We were on the bipartisan group that came together for major drug reform. We actually passed the first statewide needle exchange in the Southeast in Kentucky, treating addiction as a disease that needs to be treated, that we can't incarcerate our way out of. I worked with activists and organizers like Katura Heron to help restore voting rights to over 100,000 Kentuckians. I worked with State Senator Gerald Neal, Representative Pamela Stevenson on the HBCU bill I talked about earlier. I worked with Legal Aid on protecting victims of domestic violence. I have worked with people all over, going in, doing really hard work, listening to those solutions. And I was happy that when John Yarmouth got out, I got in, and that the people I've worked with and the people that we've done really meaningful policy work were willing to stand up and support what we've done and say that they too think that Louisville needs a proven voice in Congress, someone who has shown they can stand up for our values, fight for people, and get things done. I'm also proud of the leadership we've made in the state Senate. We have had an African-American member leadership for the state Senate Democrats for several years now. Gerald Neal and then Reggie Thomas. Senator Neal passed a wonderful bill this year on sickle cell anemia. You saw Charles Booker, when he was a state representative, pass the law that helps provide insulin for people. You saw Colonel Stevenson, Representative Pamela Stevenson, pass a bill in her very first year in office. Look, as a Democrat, it's tough to pass bills. It takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of getting in and trying to find real solutions, but it is possible.
Do you think that if you were a black woman, the questioner asked, you would have had the same opportunity?
Like I just said, Representative Pamela Stevenson passed a bill in her very first session. She's been there for 2 years. She's been co-sponsoring several other bills. So, that shows the General Assembly is working with all members who are also willing to put in that work.
The questioner asks, since Kentucky is now 5th in the nation in incarcerating its citizens, which destroys families and makes us less safe, how do we educate an apathetic public?
One, I think that criminal justice reform needs to be a part of any platform. I've worked on 3 criminal justice task forces in Kentucky. We've made some real strides, including influencing the executive orders of governors and passing legislation, again, like the statewide needle exchange. And so I also think that we need to make sure we are continuing to fight against something I've done, fight against having for-profit prisons in Kentucky. There should never be a profit motive to having people incarcerated. And I think we need to go to further measures, like restoring voting rights and recognizing that we're a country of second chances and redemption. There's an education component to that question. I have been a fierce advocate of education since being in the General Assembly. I think that education ultimately is the greatest disruptor of poverty. And I think that increasing education, I'm sure there is an education question in here, but I think increasing education, relooking at education as a whole is what we need to be doing, seeing that it doesn't just need to be K through 12 anymore. I'm talking universal pre-K to even free and community technical vocational school after college for a couple of years, and look at public education differently.
The questioner asks, our city, the Derby, the economy are blooming because of immigrants. Specifically, what is your plan to support undocumented citizens that make this blooming possible?
Yeah, without question. I'm so glad this question is asked. And first of all, we can't go back to the Trump era policies that put kids in cages, or the performative politics we see from Republicans at the border right now. We need Congress to do its job. and come forward with a broad pathway to citizenship. I've met with members of the Latino community here in Louisville, and they talk openly about what I think many of us know or talk about more privately, which is, you mentioned the Kentucky Derby. We just had one of the most exciting Kentucky Derbies in history, and it's not possible without immigrant workers. We need to create that broad pathway to citizenship. That's going to take coalition building and consensus, something I'm willing to do, again, to listen, to go in, to do the work, and to try and push this through.
We have a question from the audience that I'm going to use moderator discretion on one question here to add to it. The questioner asks, due to the division in Congress, what, or more importantly, how do you plan to get anything accomplished for Kentucky? I'll ask you, Senator McGarvey, given the fact that many prognosticators see the Congress going to a Republican majority in the fall on the midterms, how do you see yourself positioned versus your opponent in terms of working with a Republican majority in the U.S. House?
Well, first of all, I just refuse to take a defeatist attitude. We can get things done, right? We have to work to get things done. I know it's hard. Look, I get frustrated too. You look at Washington right now and you see Madison Cawthorn's behavior. You see Marjorie Taylor Greene's antics. You see Matt Gaetz's, well, everything that Matt Gaetz is doing right now. But I think we don't get to vote for 435 members of Congress. We get to vote for one. And we need to send a member from Louisville to be Louisville's voice, to be Kentucky's Democratic voice in Washington, who has shown that proven ability to work with people to get things done. As I said, I've been in the super minority every day since being in service. Super minority. I've passed, these are the bills I've written, 18 bills into law. I created the Affordable Housing Caucus in Frankfurt to try and get more affordable housing units. I've took on the insurance companies. Passed a law that will help Louisville get more affordable housing here. It's why I'm running for Congress, because I think we need someone who is going to go and stand up, whether in the majority or the minority, stand up for our values, fight for people, but always be willing to listen to every person in every community, to find solutions and move us forward to actually get things done.
Questioner asks, can you share where in Louisville you grew up, what neighborhood, and how did this shape you?
Yeah, sure. I grew up in the East End in Louisville, and I grew up with my parents, who I think are there today, actually. They certainly aren't at my house, but they were planning on coming today. My parents raised the three of us. My sister is a public school teacher and counselor. My brother just this week is celebrating his 20th year in the armed service, and I've chosen service too. Service was a big part of growing up for us. It's the values my parents taught us. I'm lucky to have had two loving parents who are still very supportive, and I hope that I teach my kids the same values of importance of service and helping others that I learned growing up.
Senator, your commercials present you as a true progressive. How do you see yourself as a progressive compared to your Democratic opponent in this primary?
Again, I have to go back to what I said earlier. I'm the Democratic leader of the state Senate. I got that position when Matt Bevin was governor. I have taken on and led every fight against a conservative supermajority Republican legislature since being in office. Pick the issue, taking on the health insurance companies, looking out for workers, trying to protect our unions that built the middle class, trying to protect Kentucky's environment, right? Trying to save our planet, protecting women's rights, right? But I've done that while also trying to make progress on some big things, which we've done. You tried to interrupt me, Joe, but I was telling the story. We preserved marriage equality in Kentucky, the home of Kim Davis. It wasn't easy, but I didn't give up, right? And so I'm going to do what I've always said I would do. When I ran for state Senate in 2012, I said, I'm going to go to Frankfurt and stand up and defend our values and get things done. Now, all of a sudden, I'm running for Congress. I didn't change the theme of why I'm running. The theme of why I'm running, and you've seen it on television, is I'm going to go to Congress. I am going to stand up for our people, fight for our values, right? But do it while trying to get big things done. This time I have 10 years behind me of a track record of proving that that's what I'll do.
The question is, how will you legislate to reduce/eliminate versus reliance on fossil fuels?
Yeah, Kentucky is so well positioned for this, right? And maybe as a Kentuckian, I get a little indignant. We've got to save the planet. The UN issued its April climate report and said now or never, right? We have to be moving away from fossil fuels. And again, Kentucky's positioned to do this, right? Governor Beshear just announced $7 billion of economic development investment to create electric powered vehicles right here in Kentucky. We're going to do the batteries right here in Kentucky. So we are positioned to do this. And I think we should go further than that, right? Kentucky powered the last energy revolution. And we paid for it. We paid for it in the lives of our miners. We should be on the forefront of powering the next energy revolution that is led with renewable energy, that is creating good paying green union jobs right here in our state.
We have a question from the audience. There seems to be an underlying controversy among Representative Scott, yourself, and the current Congressman John Yarmouth. Can you shed any light on this?
Actually, what I was going to say, and I should have said this at the beginning, when I was thanking you guys, thank Representative Scott. I know we've had 2 debates this week, and we both wanted them to be in person, right? And she's been very gracious and accommodating in dealing with my very close exposure and Chris's, my wife's sickness, especially as we have an unvaccinated 3-year-old who we don't have childcare for right now. I actually think this has been a generally positive campaign. And, you've seen our ads, they're upbeat, they're positive. We're not seeing attacks come out of this race. I don't see a situation.
The questioner asks, how do you see yourself representing the future of Kentucky politics?
Yeah, I think that we have to have younger people in office, right? It's not time for the next generation of leaders. It's time for the now generation of leaders. People who've grown up and seen what it's like to have their generation crippled by student loan debt. That we need to save the planet for our kids and for ourselves. That we need to make sure that everybody has an equal and level playing field, and finally deal with the impact of policies that have provoked systemic racism, right? I think that we need to stand up and talk about these things, talk about them clearly, protect women's rights, have these conversations that maybe older generations didn't have. And we need to do it and stand up and fight for our values, but also make progress because the future depends on it.
The questioner alleges, and I don't know the facts of this, so I'll just read it, that your campaign was recently backed by nearly $1 million in ads from a crypto billionaire. Can you discuss where your financial support comes from and why this is important?
Sure. So, let's see what the Supreme Court does with Roe versus Wade. But I think that Citizens United is certainly in the running to be one of the worst Supreme Court decisions of this century. I will not only be a vote in Congress to overturn Citizens United, I've been a vote in the state legislature on this. I have voted against increasing the spending limits for state elections, and I have voted against decreasing the transparency requirements for candidate filings. So I think that we should be getting rid of Citizens United and a lot of this money that comes in. I know that the money we've raised, the vast majority of it is from right here in Kentucky. There is a group that came in and is running ads. I can tell you this is kind of frightening as a candidate because we don't know what they're going to do, what they're going to say, or how they're going to do it. I had to Google the group that came in. It turns out the group that comes in, they are in favor of guarding against future pandemics. Now, this is in line with my view of what government can do, that our government can solve big problems. And I think we should be working to guard against future pandemics, right? We can do this in a number of ways. We can increase the stockpiles, right? We can increase the research budgets, and not just the research budgets, we can increase the protocols and protections put around facilities and institutions that are dealing with these incredibly contagious viruses. Look at the fire codes. There used to be catastrophic building or apartment fires until we changed the law. We required sprinklers. We had maximum occupancy codes. We had smoke detectors, right? And even though there are still fires, there aren't as many of them, and they don't result in the casualties of the past. What if in buildings going forward, we start requiring additional ventilation and filtration system that reduce the number of airborne pathogens? Not only is this going to keep people safer and healthier at work on a day-to-day basis, it's going to help us deal with future pandemics going forward, which is something I think our government should take seriously, especially right now as I am zooming into you guys from home because my wife is sick.
What is your position or what the government can do on the skyrocketing crime rate? Is there a role for a member of Congress?
Yeah, I mean, look, this is one where I have knocked on people's doors for a decade. I've had legislative hearings. I've gone to community forums. I have talked with people everywhere in every corner of our community. Never once have I heard that someone wants their community to be less safe, right? In fact, everyone wants to be safe in their home and to feel safe in their home and their community. I think we need to acknowledge that not everyone does feel safe in their home or in their community. And one of the things I think we need to do is fully fund public safety. That includes having more social workers, having more mental health workers, right? I work downtown. How many times have those of us who are in downtown on a daily basis seen more than one police officer having to manage someone who's clearly in a mental health crisis, right? We have agencies and people who are better suited to deal with that. It also means that we need to have better training, recruitment, and retention policies in our police force, and that we need to have the right funding in place to make that happen. But I don't think we should just talk about budgets. I think we need to talk about actual reform, right? And in Congress, I will be a vote for the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. Just as I was working with community organizers and activists and people across the political spectrum in Kentucky to ban no-knock warrants here, we need to ban no-knock warrants on a federal level, and we need to curb some of the most abusive practices. Also here in Kentucky, I've been the leader on the fight to get meaningful subpoena power for our civilian review boards, including introducing bills, including this year trying to amend bills that otherwise dealt with Louisville, that I don't think Louisvillians did want, to try and get subpoena power so we can have real and meaningful accountability.
Yesterday, President Biden said that his economic measures are this is a moderator discretion, by the way, this is at the end of this program here. Yesterday, the president said that his economic policies were working to combat inflation. Do you think President Biden's economic policies are working? And was it a mistake for the U.S. to spend as much money on relief measures as what it has, given what we have today?
Yeah, so I mean, look, I had to fill up the car with gas this morning. It was $4.19 at the Shell station for my house. When you go to the grocery, when you go to Costco, you notice that the price of goods are going up. We're feeling it at our house. I'm particularly worried for our seniors, people on fixed income, our poor and working poor who are having to deal with rising costs. We all know what inflation is, right? It's when demand is greater than supply. So first of all, I think we are still trying to untangle ourselves from the supply chain problems created by the first global pandemic we've had in over 100 years. Those have been exacerbated by Putin's unprovoked war on Ukraine. One thing I don't hear in your question on news coverage right now, though, is the presence of corporate greed. I've mentioned that gas prices are $4.19 at the Shell station down the street from my house this morning. ExxonMobil posted record profits in Q1 of this year. Record profits. So we're paying more at the pump. They're paying more to their executives and their shareholders, right? I think there's a couple of things we need to do. One, I think we need to repeal the Trump tax giveaways to the wealthiest corporations and individuals, right? I think that's something we can do. I think we can look at our antitrust laws. I think we need to recognize that people need relief right now. Let's make the child tax credit permanent. That puts money in the hands of working families who need it, so that they can deal with some of the rising costs. And of course, obviously, this is an issue where the Fed on the front page of the New York Times today said that they might have been a little slow to act. And I think that we need to watch the interest rates as well.
We have 1 minute left. I'm going to time you, though, 1 minute for any closing statement before we bring up Representative Scott. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be here, even though it's virtually. I truly wish I could be with you guys today. I'll start with what I was going to close with before, which is we don't get to vote for 435 members of Congress. We get to vote for one. It's incredibly important for Louisville to continue to have an effective voice. Congressman Yarmouth, or Congressman Awesome, as he has been called, has done a great job rising to be the chairperson of the House Budget Committee, authoring the American Rescue Plan Act, which saves so many families. We need to make sure we send a representative to Washington who has shown the ability to stand up and fight for our values, but do it while building coalitions that will get things done that can help people in their everyday lives, because we are still capable of that. And I do believe our best days are in front of us.
Senator McGarvey, thank you very much. As we bring up Representative Scott, let's thank both of them for being here. Here you go. Representative Scott, thank you for being here in person. We appreciate that. I'm going to begin with the first question that we asked Senator McGarvey. Since you both have served in the legislature, what is the piece of legislation? Actually, before I do that, I give you a chance to actually introduce yourself. I apologize, please. Why are you the best person to represent the 3rd Congressional District in Congress?
Well,
thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to introduce myself to everyone. I am State Representative Attica Scott, and I serve Kentucky House District 41 in Frankfort, and I am running for Congress to represent the 3rd Congressional District in Washington, D.C. The reality is I'm a leader without borders, so I will be representing a lot of folks across Kentucky who do not feel like they are well represented in Washington, D.C. because we are the only Democratic seat in our Commonwealth. I am running because I love Louisville and I love Kentucky, and that's why I showed up on the railroad tracks in eastern Kentucky to stand with striking railroad workers, and that's why in December when we experienced the climate disaster in western Kentucky, I went to western Kentucky to help provide relief as they were recovering from that climate disaster. I am running for Congress because you deserve to have a champion in Congress who's going to stand up, show up, and speak out for and with you.
Thank you. Now we'll go to the questions. I appreciate you letting me jump the gun there. Since you have both served in the legislature, the question for both of you was, what is your piece of legislation that you led or sponsored of which you are most proud?
I'm most proud of the Maternal Care Act to address institutional and systemic racism in healthcare. And for the first 5 years that I was in our state legislature, the chair of Health and Family Services would not utter the words health disparities or racism in healthcare. And now, 6 years later, for the first time ever, she stood on the House floor this year and said we need to address racial disparities in healthcare. That's what happens when you push people outside of their comfort zone, because it wasn't her reality. Even though she's a mother of 5 boys, it wasn't her reality that black women are 3 to 4 times more likely to die in childbirth than white women. But we spent years educating her and getting her to the point where now she is open and ready to have this conversation. That's important for all of Kentucky, and I'm proud of that piece of legislation.
Some would say, and so you know, we're reading the questions that are specifically for each of you, as we did for Senator McGarvey. This questioner says, some would say you don't have the experience for the job of a congressperson. What would you say qualifies you for this job?
That's an interesting question because I served on Louisville Metro Council. I'm a current state representative, and I'm not sure what additional experience that someone is saying I lack it takes to serve in Washington, D.C. as your member of Congress. You've seen me stand up as a member of Louisville Metro Council. You've seen me pass a bill to raise the wage, which 2 years later, the Kentucky Supreme Court struck down after it asked for a raise for itself. You saw me pass a unanimous bill for second chances for people to take the question off of a job application about whether or not someone has a felony conviction. You know it as the Ban the Box bill. And you also know I passed a unanimous resolution on Metro Council to restore voting rights to people who were once incarcerated. And you've seen me in Frankfort. I know you have. Showing up, speaking out, and standing up on the issues that are most pressing for people across Kentucky. And that's exactly what I will do in Washington, D.C.
I'm going to ask 2 questions at once because I'm going to follow up on a question I asked Senator McGarvey. First, the questioner asks to you specifically, is it important for elected officials to be able to identify with the struggles of regular people? And as part of that, I'm going to ask about some of the demographics that was asked of the senator. And he was asked if he was a black woman and not a white man, does he believe the legislature would have allowed him to hold a leadership position or hear his bills? Could you respond to both of those questions?
I'm going to be honest, Joe, and respond to the first one,
Okay,
and then I'll probably
then I'll
ask
come
you
back.
what the second
Sure.
one was.
Okay.
Okay, so the first question.
Is it important for elected officials to be able to identify with the struggles of regular people?
It's vitally important. One of the reasons you see people rise up is because elected officials, politicians haven't been identifying with them, haven't been listening to them, haven't been showing up to the places and spaces where we are crying out for justice. Many times I showed up in Frankfort with the Poor People's Campaign because those were people across Kentucky who were living in poverty who said, we won't be ignored anymore. You're going to hear our cries for justice. And when the state, including the state police, the Historic Society, the governor at the time, banned the Poor People's Campaign from entering the Capitol, I joined with Representative George Brown of Lexington to write a letter to our then Attorney General Beshear to demand that the doors of the Capitol be opened back up to our neighbors across Kentucky, and that's exactly what happened. It matters that you have someone like me who grew up in poverty in the projects of Beecher Terrace who could say to the Poor People's Campaign, I feel your pain, and I'm going to use my position as an elected official in Frankfort to write this letter to the Attorney General asking for his opinion about whether or not it was constitutional to block you from entering the people's house.
I just realized that there is a question that speaks directly to you from the other one I was going to ask before. The questioner says, your life experiences matter so much in representing people from communities that have been and continue to be marginalized. How can we build a Congress of regular people and not continue seeing so many privileged people in Congress?
We can do that right now. We can make sure that we don't allow an ungodly amount of money from a cryptocurrency super PAC to decide this election. We can decide ourselves as the people of the 3rd Congressional District. We can do that right now by making sure that we fight to address the issue of money in politics. It's ridiculous. You shouldn't have to raise $1 million to run for office in Jefferson County, Kentucky, or anywhere else. The people, all of us, should be able to run for office and not allow money to keep us out of it. I'm going to speak to you as a woman who graduated from the first class of Emerge Kentucky, which trains Democratic women to run for office. What keeps Democratic women from running is money. Money keeps us from running, and we cannot allow that to be the case anymore.
Now I'll follow up with a question that was asked to Senator McGarvey. Do you think that if he had been a black woman and not a white man, that he would have been in the leadership position in the Kentucky Senate that he has enjoyed?
I can't speak from that perspective because I'm not a white man, and the majority of people who serve in Frankfort are white men. What I can say is I'm grateful that I was able to soften the ground for the black women and the one Indian immigrant woman we have serving in Frankfort who came after me. So for nearly 2 decades, we didn't have any black women or any other women of color serving in Frankfort. I thought that was quite shameful, and we should have done a lot more work to change that because representation truly does matter, and the issues that people bring up really do make a difference. But for 4 years, I was the only black woman, and I spent that time working across Kentucky to help recruit other black women and women of color to run and to make sure that whatever I went through, they didn't have to experience when they got there. So representation definitely matters.
So I'm going to combine 2 questions like I did for the senator. The question that was written is, due to the division in Congress, what, or more importantly, how do you plan to get anything accomplished for Kentucky? I'll ask that in the same prism that I asked him, which is that most prognosticators and many predict that Republicans will win the majority in the U.S. House this fall. How do you see yourself in that construct?
Well, first I would say we need to be really careful about these predictions. They don't always work out. We know that. And so we should not allow ourselves to be governed by folks who often don't have the best interests of the people of our Commonwealth, of our city, or really of this country in mind. They're just politicos who think they know better than the rest of us. So I'm going to start with that. Secondly, if y'all are paying attention, because I know I am, with this leaked decision from SCOTUS about overturning Roe v. Wade, I'm pretty confident there are going to be some people who didn't plan to vote in their primary elections at home or in the general in November who are going to show up at the polls because they know that their lives are literally on the line. This is not a game. For some politicos, it's a game that they want to play. But for many of us, it's about our lives being on the line. So I think that we're going to see something different when the elections happen in November. And so to your question about working with that division exists everywhere. I don't want to be naive enough to think that we all just get along and sing Kumbaya, because we don't. Divisions exist in your neighborhood, your household, your job, in schools, everywhere. But what we can do is make sure that we have conversations with one another, listen to one another. The reason why I was able to get my Republican colleagues to sponsor bills that I sponsored while I was on Louisville Metro Council and they voted for them is because even though Democrats had the majority, I went to my Republican colleagues and said, I want to listen to you, hear from you. We are both people of faith, and we say that our faith leads us and guides us. So if your faith tells us that someone should have a second or third chance, then of course you should vote for ban-the-box legislation. But what I could have done, which happens far too often, is not bother to have spoken to my Republican colleagues because I didn't need their vote. That's not the kind of leader that I am. I'm going to talk to you anyway because I respect you and I value you.
Let me follow up, if I could. Given the current Congress that we've all watched, we saw what happened during the Build Back Better campaign, and we saw at least two different camps of or strategies among the Democratic Party. Where do you fit into that? Would you be with the AOC progressive wing, if you will, kind of sticking to your guns, for lack of better words, and saying we're gonna hold the line and demand this, or do you see yourself as more of a compromiser and with the president in that particular situation?
So, and I'm glad that you said it's situational, because for me, the situation does matter. There have been times in Frankfurt where I did not vote with my Democratic colleagues on issues like the gang bill to lock up more black and brown kids. Only 3 of us voted against that bill, and we were all Democrats. So I have not always stood with my own party, because I know it doesn't see sometimes me and the community that I came from and where I live now. So yes, of course, there are going to be times in DC where I'm not going to be aligned with my party, because my party probably isn't aligned with me and many folks that I have to come home to and talk to. That's important. I don't think you would want someone who's going to go along to get along. And then you end up looking back and saying, oh, maybe we should have listened to them. They had a good point.
Since Kentucky is now 5th in the nation in incarcerating its citizens, I'm repeating the question from earlier, which destroys families and makes us less safe, how do we educate an apathetic public on that issue?
Well, there are folks who are educating people all the time, and I want to lift that up and acknowledge it, whether it's groups like Cities United or Russell Place of Promise or organizations like Kentuckians for the Commonwealth. There are groups all the time educating and organizing people across the Commonwealth about this and many other issues, and I want to affirm them. I also want you to know that I often use my own platform to have Facebook Lives or Instagram Lives to engage in conversation with people about these issues, because I know I have a responsibility, but I also have an audience. And because I have that audience, I want to help educate that audience, and so I use my platform in that way, and we have to continue to do that. The ways in which people get information is shifting constantly, and so we have to figure out how do we shift along with our audience.
Again, repeating an earlier question, since it was to both of you, our city, the Derby, and the economy are blooming because of immigrants. Specifically, what is your plan to support undocumented citizens that make this blooming possible?
Yes, for 14 years now, I've been deeply engaged with our local Latinx community. I served on the board of the La Casita Center and was active with the Americana Community Center and the Hispanic Latino Coalition. I served on that board of directors. And when Kentucky had its anti-immigrant legislation, we worked together to defeat that legislation, work together across the Commonwealth of Kentucky, because we said that immigrants belong here. And we will do everything that we can to make sure that our state legislature reflected that. And I will continue to show up with our immigrant community. And despite the fact that in an attack poll against me, our immigrants were lifted up as sacrificial lambs in that attack poll, I rejected that. I rejected that poll because we should not be using people as pawns in these political games. Instead, we should be making sure that people have access to the needs that they have in order to thrive in our community. And I will do the work that I need to do in Congress to make sure that we pass every element of the DREAM Act that young people have been fighting for, and support pathways to citizenship, and support families being together. There's still families that are disconnected from one another after babies were ripped from their mama's breastfeeding arms. We still have a lot of work to do, y'all, to get our families reunited.
I am going to ask you in a moment here about inflation and President Biden, like I did Senator McGarvey, but because we talked about immigration a moment ago, do you have any comments on the Biden administration? And some Democrats have been critical that they have not moved far enough away from Trump policies given during his administration. So first on immigration, and then I'm asking about inflation.
Yes, no, that's true that the Biden administration hasn't moved far enough away from Trump's policies, and I'm confident that the administration, especially with the pressure it's receiving from its own members of Congress, but also folks in community, I'm confident, though, that the Biden administration will move in the right direction as it relates to immigration.
Okay, this is prerogative again. What gives you that confidence if they haven't done it in the last 2 years?
Well,
since he's been president?
My confidence is that I have seen the administration address issues because of the pressure it received inside and outside, inside in Congress, outside in community, whether it's the president speaking up on abortion in a way that he hadn't done before, or if it's the president really pushing for Build Back Better, but then eventually acknowledging what some members of Congress were fighting for, whether it's the president really finally speaking up on environmental issues in a bold, progressive way. It might not happen overnight, but I believe it's going to happen because that pressure makes a difference. And I do believe we have a president who is listening to that pressure. He's not allowing himself to be guided by the people who want him to be closed-minded and forget about many of us across the country who are still struggling.
Now back to the president and this administration regarding their economic policies and given the fact that the inflation rate of what we're seeing and some of the news we had this morning from last month, 8.3%, I believe the rate of inflation continues to accelerate. Do you think that the president was correct when he said yesterday that his economic policies are working? And if not, what would you do differently? And thirdly, was it a mistake for the administration and for the U.S. to spend as much as it has on relief measures? So it's a combination of questions there.
Yes.
I apologize.
That's okay. So I'll take the last one first
Sure.
and say that no, I do not believe that it was a mistake for the administration to take care of people during a global pandemic, to make sure that folks could feed their families, to make sure that folks could pay their bills. I do not think that that was a mistake. That's exactly what we needed, and we still need it because we're still in a global pandemic. We know, right, from the fact that we're having a different kind of Louisville Forum today. So, no, I do not believe that the president or the administration went too far or should not have taken care of our people when they needed us to take care of them.
And let me ask you then about the president. He's saying that it's working. His policies, he thinks, are actually having a positive effect. Do you agree with that?
I would say that his policies are having a positive effect for some people, as almost all policies do, right? Unless you're intentional about addressing the needs of the people who haven't been represented or who you're not having conversations about or with. What I will say, though, is that if we want to get our economy on a track that is working for most of us, we have to tax billionaires, we have to pay people a living wage, and we have to address the fact that corporations and businesses can do almost anything they want to. In fact, we even consider them people and try to give them the same rights as people when they are not. They are corporations, they are entities, and our people are the ones that we need to take care of.
Perhaps this is a segue then, the question that was asked earlier of the senator. The questioner alleges, and I don't know the facts of this, that he was recently backed by nearly $1 million in ads from a crypto billionaire. Could you discuss where your financial support comes from and why that's important?
I certainly can. So my financial support comes from the people of Louisville and from Kentucky and from folks across the country who want to see us progress, to move forward, to be bold in our leadership, and I'm eternally grateful. I'm really grateful that the majority of our donors have been teachers and folks who have a monthly donation of $5 and $10 per month. Those are folks who are digging deep in some situations to pockets that don't have much of anything, and in some cases, pockets that have a lot.
Do you consider, the other question I asked Senator McGarvey, do you consider crime to be a major issue, and does Congress have any role in minimizing the violent crime that some people are concerned about?
Yes, definitely crime is an issue. I think that any of us who tried to leave today and say that it wasn't would be naive, or maybe you live somewhere else other than Louisville. But crime is an issue, and it's something that Congress needs to address. It needs to address crime by addressing the needs of the people. And I say this as someone whose father and brother were both incarcerated. You have to address what people are needing every single day, whether it's food or shelter or transportation to work or work in their own communities or a robust public education system that everyone has access to. You have to address those needs. And then if we want to address it from the perspective of community safety, then we have to make sure that every single community and neighborhood is safe. I shouldn't be able to go anywhere in the west end of Louisville and there isn't street lighting. And there are neighborhoods in West Louisville where there's no street lighting. So you've left us vulnerable, and we're set up for failure. So we have to make sure that every single part of our community is well taken care of. We have to make sure, even down to roads and our infrastructure, for some people that may not be a safety issue, that's most definitely a safety issue, whether your roads are safe, whether you have abandoned and vacant properties around you where dead bodies have been found. If we're not addressing that issue, we're not addressing public safety. We're allowing people to have safe havens for criminal activity when we have boarded up and abandoned buildings around us. My neighborhood, the Parkland neighborhood, 30% of the properties are abandoned or vacant, 30%. So that means when kids are getting on the bus to go to school, they're passing those properties, and we don't know what's happening in those buildings.
Again, repeating a question that we asked Senator McGarvey, there seems to be an underlying controversy among Representative Scott, Senator McGarvey, and Congressman Yarmouth. Can you shed any light on this?
I cannot, because people try to create drama and gossip from all the different ways and places that they can. And because it wasn't specific, I don't want to play into that.
Now you're putting me on the spot. I can be more specific.
Please.
Okay. Congressman Yarmouth did appear at our Louisville Forum in February and was interviewed by Philip Bailey from USA Today. And he basically said that you had told him that you would not be running, but then you announced before, in fact, he announced he was retiring. He saw some problem with that. But then again, just in all fairness, Philip Bailey followed up with that by asking whether his endorsement of Morgan McGarvey was seen as perhaps an old boys network at play. So those are the two things: truthfulness with Congressman Yarmouth, and then secondly, do you believe his endorsement is an example of an old boys network, as it was said at the time?
Certainly. So I did call Congressman Yarmouth. Why would I call to say I'm not running? That doesn't even make sense. I made it very clear that I was interested in running.
Can you share where in Louisville you grew up, what neighborhood, and how this shaped you?
I grew up in Beecher Terrace, which has been torn down, as you all know, and now multifamily, single-family housing is being built there. So it's a very different place than where I grew up. But when I grew up in Beecher Terrace, it was a place of love and support and community and family, and it's where I ended up going to, starting at Coleridge Taylor Elementary, and then it was bused to St. Matthews, and then was bused to Carruthers Middle School, and then ended up graduating from Manual High School. So Beecher was community for me.
How will you legislate to reduce/eliminate versus reliance on fossil fuels?
Yeah, so I've been a member of Rubbertown Emergency Action Network since, I don't know, 2004 or so. And it's an organization that for probably 25 years now has been addressing these kinds of environmental issues along the south end, Cane Run Road, and the west end of Louisville, because as you all know, we have more than a dozen chemical companies along the Rubbertown corridor. And addressing the issue of fossil fuel industries and what we've done to our mountains in Kentucky, blowing off the mountaintops to get to coal, is something that many of us have been addressing for years, and we've started to remediate some of that and address this issue by stopping some of that coal mining activity that was blowing off mountaintops. But now what we have to address is holding these companies accountable for polluting our water streams. Knox County and Martin County, Kentucky still don't have clean bathing and drinking water. So as a congresswoman from the 3rd Congressional District, I'm also going to be taking Knox and Martin County with me to Washington, D.C. to say that we've got to address the needs of folks across Kentucky who don't have the kind of good representation that's going to fight for them every single day. So I'm going to be that congressperson to fight for them as well, because they are our neighbors, they are our siblings. I love them. We should all love one another across Kentucky to make sure that we take care of the issues that impact every single person in this Commonwealth, including holding industry accountable, industry that often fuels the campaigns of some of these politicians who don't want to do a thing about environmental issues.
This question was asked, a version of it earlier, but because it's written specifically to you, I'm going to ask it again. So many elected officials, especially at the congressional level, are privileged, rich, and white. Does this matter when it comes to the struggle of regular families?
What matters is that we get people in office who are different, who have different life experiences and different life stories to bring, because otherwise, going back to my previous point, when you ignore people, people rise up. Whether you like it or not, or it makes you uncomfortable or comfortable or not, people are going to rise up. So until we get more people in office who reflect the reality of folks every single day, who don't have the privilege of connecting to folks with names or money or who have positions, things are going to remain the same. It does matter who's in office, and we have the chance to change representation in the 3rd Congressional District.
Before we get to your final minute of comments here, our final question, and thank you for all the questions we had today from everyone in attendance. The same question that I posed to Senator McGarvey: how do you see yourself representing the future of Kentucky politics?
I see myself representing the future of Kentucky politics because that's what I've been doing, whether as a Louisville Metro Councilwoman or with my experience as a state representative. I've been making sure that I did the work of expanding our representation, that it wasn't just about me. Nobody wants to be the only one. That's not a comfortable place to be in. You want to bring more people along so that you can actually get the work done for the people that you're serving. And so for me, I'm grateful to have had that opportunity to keep building the way that we need to build across our Commonwealth and right here in the 3rd District. You now have 3 Black women and an Indian immigrant woman serving in Frankfort, and I helped to soften that ground to make that happen. And that's what I will continue to do, because I know that I have the backbone and the strength and the courage to take whatever is thrown at me and turn that back into building power for our people.
It's possible that I neglected to ask you something. This is your opportunity here to close any closing statement in terms of what you want to tell our forum audience today.
Definitely. I know I've got my minute timer going. So
You're good.
Again, I am State Representative Attica Scott, and I'm running to be your Congresswoman from the 3rd Congressional District. I would be honored if you send me to Washington, D.C. to be your champion, to show up and to stand up and to speak out for the needs that our folks across Louisville have been crying out for. You can learn more about our campaign at atticaforcongress.com. Join us in these last few days, because we are building power, we are building something different, and we are campaigning in a way to make sure that we all win, whether it's May 17th or in November. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I want to thank both Senator McGarvey as well as Representative Scott for being here today. Again, thanks to both of the candidates for being with us today. Just as a reminder, what we said earlier, we do plan, and we hope we can count on, we'll ask Representative Scott and Senator McGarvey now to commit to appearing at a debate this fall between the Republican candidate and whoever prevails in the Democratic primary now. Our next meeting is Wednesday, June 8th. Our topic will be, after disruptions, what is the future of downtown Louisville? And some of that includes with the work from home going on right now and whether companies come back or not, as well as some other controversies in downtown. What is the next chapter? Reservations may be made online at louisvilleforum.org or by calling our voicemail at 329-0111. Thank you all for being here early. Thank you for your attendance. Thank you for the service of our public officials here today. Have a great afternoon. Thank you.